Joe Micheletti has called it a career. We say goodbye to the Rangers' 19-year color analyst, plus who should replace him in the booth next season.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1304 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we've had a decent amount of breaking news in Ranger land over the past couple of days here, and obviously the big headline grabber and the one that everybody is talking about is the fact that Mike Sullivan is now the new head coach of the New York Rangers. And if you want our initial thoughts on that hiring, check out the episode right before this one. Cover that in as much detail as we possibly could. And we're going to get right back to Sullivan in tomorrow's episode. But I decided, you know what? Joe Micheletti deserves his flowers. I kind of feel for Micheletti because obviously, you know, my understanding is he knew he was going to retire after this season, but he never said anything because he wanted Sam Rosen to get the spotlight. And that to me is like right on brand for Micheletti, you know, doing something like that for his friend and his colleague of so many years. But then also we get the news that, you know, right after Micheletti announces his retirement, that the Rangers hired Mike Sullivan to be their new head coach. And of course, it's not the Rangers' fault. I mean, they got to do what they got to do, and they got to go out there and get their guy. But I felt for Micheletti because I feel like his retirement just kind of got swept up. And with that being the case, I didn't want to wait any longer to talk about Micheletti on this podcast. You know, you spend 19 years with the organization and you win over the fan base and you obviously, you know, put everything you've got into your job. You at least get an episode of Locked On New York Rangers to your credit. But Joe Micheletti did release a statement upon the announcement that he was going to be retiring. This is what he had to say. From pond hockey in Minnesota to the bright lights of Broadway, my hockey journey has been a magical ride. My wife, Kathy, and I have been thinking about this for a few years, and we decided that now is the right time to retire, and we look forward to spending more time with our family. This career has been so special because of the amazing people that I've worked with at every stop along the way. Thank you to my remarkable family at MSG Networks, to the Rangers organization, and to all the teams that allowed me to do what I love for 40 years. And it's funny because obviously we knew going into this past season that, yeah, this was going to be Sam Rosen's final season. They did announce that during the preseason, I think it was, or it might have even been before the preseason. But the bottom line, before the Rangers regular season started this past year, we knew for a fact that Sam Rosen, this was going to be his last year. And we knew very well to take it in as much as we could and enjoy it as much as we could. Now, granted, the Rangers, the way they played hockey this past season, they at times made that difficult. But I think for the most part, Ranger fans, all of us kind of, you know, soaked it in as much as we could and just enjoyed one last season of Sam Rosen calling hockey for the New York Rangers. What we did not know was that the guy right next to him for the last 19 years, Joe Micheletti, he was going to be leaving as well. So it's a whole new world for the Rangers next season. You know, it goes beyond the booth, obviously. I feel like the retooling of this roster obviously began in the middle of the season last year with all the wheelings and dealings that this team made. There's a very good chance Chris Kreider could be on his way. I mean, we'll talk about that in greater detail going forward as well. But all these mainstays in the Ranger organization, you know, going to be on their way. Even somebody like Panarin, 1 year left on his contract. I got to believe this is probably going to be the last season for Panarin. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it and maybe even talk about that a little bit in the offseason as well. But times are changing, and they're changing very rapidly, and I think in some cases quicker than a lot of us thought that maybe they would, certainly when it comes to somebody like Joe Micheletti, because there was no warning sign here. I mean, I didn't know for sure what the future held for Joe Micheletti, but I just kind of assumed he'd be back for at least a few more seasons. Obviously, Kenny Albert going to be the new play-by-play announcer in the booth, and I figured the two of them would be, you know, a great pairing going forward. But that's not going to be the case. They're going to be looking for a new color analyst. We'll talk about that a little bit later in today's episode as well. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned this just a second ago, touch on it very briefly. When this news broke, honestly, my first thought was, did Joe know the whole time? And it sounds like he did. He knew that this was going to be his last season and just played it close to the vest. And I also get the feeling that, and I don't know this for sure, so let me make that clear. I don't know. This is just a guess. I'm just throwing it out there. That, again, like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, Joe purposely kept this to himself so as not to steal any of Sam Rosen's thunder. I get the feeling he didn't even tell Sam Rosen that this was going to be his last season, because I feel like if Joe did that, knowing Sam and knowing what a class act he is and what a quality announcer and just just great all-around person, he would have insisted that be a package deal this past season, that it's not just going to be Sam's farewell tour, it's going to be Joe and Sam's farewell tour this season. And obviously that didn't happen. And I think part of the reason for that, it sounds like Joe did play this very close to the vest. So again, like I said a minute ago, very much in character for Joe Micheletti to do it that way. By all accounts, just a really good guy. You think about Sam and Joe and their lasting impact and their lasting legacies, and we'll discuss that later today too. But let me just say right here, right now, that I think one of the biggest things is you never hear anybody say anything bad about them. Anytime one of their names comes up, whether it's one of the Ranger beat reporters, whether it's a fan like you and me, anybody that's ever had an interaction with the two of them, they just say they're awesome. They're salt of the earth type guys. And look, announcing is always subjective, but I think for the most part, I mean, it's hard, as I've talked about in the past, to get Ranger fans to agree on anything. Their approval rating was very high. Every now and then you get a couple of detractors, and it feels like no sports announcer has a 100% approval rating. But man, these two were just beloved by the Ranger fan base. They obviously had great chemistry together as well. And, it is sad that Joe is leaving. I mean, we knew Sam was leaving, but now Joe's leaving too. And in some ways, it's unfortunate, but at the same time, maybe it's kind of the poetic way to go out. Him and Sam were there together forever, 19 years as partners. And now, like I said, it's going to be a new booth next season. And, like I said, it is a little bit sad because Sam, obviously he gets the big farewell tour. Joe doesn't really get anything because he kept it to himself, or that's certainly what it seemed like. And then you get the Sullivan news, and you know how it is, how fast the news cycle just keeps going. But I did want to give him his props here. But yeah, man, I mean, Joe just a hockey lifer, 4 seasons in the NHL. This was interesting. I knew he had played with the Blues. I knew that for sure. Wasn't sure if he played with any other NHL teams. Apparently he did. One other team, the Colorado Rockies. You heard that correctly. The Rockies were a team that existed in hockey from 1976 to 1982. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Joe was there for the final season of Colorado Rockies hockey. So that's kind of interesting in its own right. 11 goals and 60 assists in Joe's career in 158 games as a defenseman. Another goal and 11 assists in 11 playoff games. And as I mentioned a minute ago, just a hockey lifer. Won 2 national championships in hockey, in college, I should say, at the University of Minnesota. Assistant coach with the Blues for 3 seasons. He called as an announcer 5 Winter Olympics and 25 Stanley Cups. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So, yeah, sad to see him go. He obviously did a heck of a job while he was with the Rangers. And again, very, very popular among the fan base. And like I said, this episode's all for Joe. So I'll keep everything rolling in just a second. I do want to discuss a little bit about, who might be in line to replace Joe Micheletti, who I think the best choice might be. We'll get to that in just a second.
Do you have trouble sleeping? If so, you're not alone. That used to be me, lacking rest, tossing and turning. I was late for meetings. I never felt like myself. That's until I found Bare Mattress. Bare Mattress and their sleep recovery technology helped me fall asleep faster, as well as enjoy deeper sleeps. I felt like myself again, and you can too. Bare Mattress knows that every sleeper is different. That's why they have their sleep quiz on their website that finds you your perfect match. As a side sleeper, I matched with the Elite Hybrid mattress, and I've been telling everyone in my life they have to try Bare Mattress risk-free. You can sleep on your Bare Mattress up to 120 nights, and if you're not getting the best sleep of your life, you can get it refunded. They'll pick it up with absolutely no hassle. So go to bearmattress.com and use my promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout to get 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com. Use my promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
All right, so let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers. As always, like I said earlier, going to be more Mike Sullivan stuff throughout the week. He still has to hire a coaching staff, or at least as of this recording, he does. Things could change by the time this episode posts, but either way, we'll talk about that. Probably going to be doing a crossover with Locked On Penguins. I'm in touch with those guys and have a bunch of questions to ask them. And in fact, while I'm thinking about this, if you yourself have a question to ask the guys from Locked On Penguins about Mike Sullivan, go ahead and leave it in the YouTube comment section for this episode, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we possibly can. On top of that, Juuso Parssinen signed a 2-year extension with the New York Rangers. We'll get to that as well. But for right now, like I said, this is the Joe Show. We're going to talk about now who takes over for Joe Micheletti next season in the Ranger booth. My top choice would be Dave Maloney. And I get the feeling, I don't know this for sure, but I get the feeling most Ranger fans would probably agree they would probably have him at or near the top of their list. First of all, he's just really good. On top of that, there's obviously a chemistry and familiarity with Kenny Albert. The two of them have been the radio Ranger announcers over the last bunch of seasons. So obviously those two have a certain rapport with each other. And obviously we know that Kenny's taking over for Sam next season. So it feels like this would just be the natural way for things to go. And again, as of this recording, no announcement has been made as far as who's going to replace Joe Micheletti. I do believe the general consensus is that Maloney probably is the front runner. And why not? He's obviously got ties to the Rangers as well. Great former Ranger, the youngest team captain in Ranger history. And we're talking now about a team that's going into its 100th season, which we obviously all hope will be a lot better than its 99th season, but only time is going to tell there. Maloney was also the captain when the Rangers made it to the finals in 1979 against the Montreal Canadiens. Unfortunately, as many of you know, some OG fans could tell you about that series. The Rangers battled, but the Canadiens were the Canadiens, and they beat the Rangers in 5 games. So obviously very unfortunate there, but they at least made it to the finals with Maloney as the captain. As far as his career stats as a player, parts of 12 seasons in the NHL, and all of them with the New York Rangers, except for the last one, which was with the Buffalo Sabres. But 657 games for Maloney, 71 goals, 246 assists for a total of 317 points. And all this to go along with 1,154 penalty minutes. I should have converted that into days. Like how many days is that in the penalty box before I hit record here? But you get the idea. It's quite some time in the sin bin for Maloney. Also, another 7 goals and 17 assists in 49 career Stanley Cup playoff games. So even before he became a Ranger announcer, and we've heard, he's on the radio and he'll be in the MSG studios every once in a while. He'll be between the benches as well. He does it all. He does it all for this team and has for quite some time. But even before any of that, back when he was a player, very popular New York Ranger, and rightfully so. There's that book. It came out a while ago. I'm trying to think how many years it's been at this point. I think it's probably been about 20 years or so since this book came out. But it was the top 100 greatest Rangers of all time. And I want to say Maloney was somewhere right there around 33, 34, 35. At a certain point, I'm going to have to pick up that book. Unfortunately, it does not have more recent Rangers. I mean, there's certainly some guys that have been playing for this team in recent seasons that would certainly be on that list now that maybe weren't at the time when the book came out. But either way, I'm sure it's a great read and a fun read. But as far as other candidates, I mean, again, for me, it's Maloney. I mean, I guess, you could maybe go with somebody like Brian Boyle. Boyle, ever since he retired, he basically jumped right into it, got right into hockey media. And we see him on the national stage every once in a while. We see him on MSG. There was actually that game where they were honoring Sam Rosen toward the end of the regular season for the Rangers. He was down there on the ice, and so was Joe Micheletti. He presided over the festivities. But then, obviously the ceremony ends, and the game's got to start, and Sam and Joe have to make their way back up to the booth. So the game started with, trying to think, was it Maloney was in the booth, and was it Maloney and Boyle? Boyle, for sure, I remember, was in the booth during that time there. So we got a little preview of Brian Boyle in the booth. But, Boyle, one thing that you can like about him for sure is he's still really close to the current game, I would say, because he's only been retired for 2 or 3 seasons? It's only 3 at the most, because I remember he was on that Penguins team that the Rangers beat in the first round of the playoffs, and that was only 3 seasons ago, 3 years ago. So, yeah, it hasn't been all that long, and he's still close to the game, and you can inject some, I guess, young blood in the booth if you want to go with Brian Boyle. I did very much enjoy the mini rant that he had on his podcast. He does a podcast with Molly Walker and Larry Brooks, and he was talking about the current players on the Rangers, and he was beside himself. Boyle, I'm talking about here. He was beside himself by some of the ways that the Ranger players were acting during and I guess after the season. Mika Zibanejad's out there after the season ends and talking about how they need better communication. And Boyle just could not believe what he was hearing when he heard some of this stuff. First of all, he called the entire team soft, so give him props for being honest there. Although if Dolan hears that, it might keep Boyle from getting into the MSG announce booth literally ever. We'll see. But yeah, he called them soft, and he was like just flabbergasted by the idea that these Ranger players were asking for better communication from the front office. He said something like, he was like, dude, I had no idea what Glenn Sather was doing or even where he was. It was something along those lines, obviously paraphrasing a little bit here, but I can appreciate the honesty there. And, he's grown into that role. Again, he basically jumped right into it after his playing days ended. And, he's been a solid addition to the MSG team. And we see him in the studio every so often. He's there a lot of the times whenever Steve Valiquette has a night off. Usually, Boyle will be in there instead. But, we see him with, Lundqvist, Valiquette, John Giannone. He does a heck of a job there for sure. So he's certainly an option. I'm still going to go with Maloney. You could maybe even throw somebody like Ryan Callahan in there. Maybe Henrik Lundqvist. I mean, see, Lundqvist does a lot of stuff, though, because we see him on the national broadcast every once in a while. He's almost always in the studio, though. I don't believe Lundqvist has done any work in the booth. You might have him like as a guest in this announced booth or that announced booth every once in a while, and he'll lend his expertise there. But that's not like a regular thing for him. So I don't know. I don't know if Lundqvist would want to get into that or if he's happy being in the studio or whatever the case might be. I think Lundqvist would be good at it, though. I really enjoy Lundqvist's work in the MSG studio and as well as on the national stage with TNT. So he's an option. Ryan Callahan, I mean, he's gotten into sports media ever since he hung them up as well. I think he'd be a good choice as well. But all these people that I just mentioned, and who knows, there could be a dark horse that I'm not even thinking of right now. That's entirely possible. Valiquette, I mean, maybe Valiquette would be interested in that, although he's so good in the studio, and he'll call out the Rangers when they need to be called out. As good as I think he would be as a color analyst, like there's part of me that says like I like him so much in the studio that I don't want anything to change there. So I don't know. I'd be curious to know if he would like that job, at least get a shot at it as well. But for my money, again, like I said, Maloney's my guy. Be curious to know what you guys think about that as well. So if you have a preference or a favorite to join Maloney in the booth, to join Albert in the booth next season, definitely let me know in the comments section. But we're going to keep everything rolling just a second. I want to talk about Joe Micheletti, his best moments, his lasting impact, and again, just basically bid him a fond farewell at the end of today's show. And we're going to go ahead and do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It is the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost. They're always a great go-to. The fact that Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids, is absolutely awesome. And the satisfying crunch of opening each shell is just like snack meditation. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. On Locked On New York Rangers, we'll conclude today's episode by, again, basically just giving Joe a proper send-off. Obviously, he's been here for just shy of 2 decades with the New York Rangers as the color analyst. So, first of all, let's also just appreciate the fact that he was with the Islanders for 8 years, and then he joined the good guys. So he was actually there. I knew he had spent some time with them, but 8 years surprised me. I had no idea he was a color analyst there for that long. But, when you think of Joe's best moments, I mean, it's a little tougher to come up with, like, iconic calls for Joe than it is for somebody like Sam. And that's not because there's anything wrong with Joe or anything like that. It's just that by the very nature of sports announcers, the play-by-play person, they're the ones that are going to have those big iconic calls because they're reacting to something incredible, amazing that happens. And then the color analyst comes in not too long after that. But that, honestly, is one of the things that I appreciated about Joe is he knew his role as the color analyst. He didn't try to step all over a moment. He would basically just let Sam do his thing And then he would step in when he was needed. He would let the moment breathe a little bit too. And I think that's something that is certainly underrated when it comes to a lot of announcing. Sometimes you just have to let the moment breathe. You just got to let the crowd noise take over and let the viewers just enjoy everything. But Joe was very good at that. There was one that kind of stood out for me, and I remember him being very good for this moment. So I went back and watched it, wrote down the entire call that he had. It was the Game 7 overtime win against the Pittsburgh Penguins a couple of years ago in the first round of the playoffs. Obviously, Panarin scored in the overtime, and Sam, had his great call, Rangers win. But he let Sam do his thing. He let it breathe. I think close to a minute went by before Joe said anything. Because again, you take your foot off the gas for a second. You let the crowd noise just kind of tell you the story. And then he explained everything that happened. He says they took a timeout, they talked it over, and finally, Artemi Panarin is able to slither one through the wrist shot. I don't think Jerry saw it. Players in front, and that ends it. And indeed it did. That was high drama, to be sure. One of the most exciting and ultimately fun moments that we've had as Ranger fans. I mean, really ever. Like it's up there. That's got to be like top 5 in the last 85 years. I mean, it's a Game 7 overtime winner, right? So very dramatic. It came against a rival, obviously, but Joe was awesome there. And his catchphrase, it's one of those things like you don't even realize how often he says it. And I got to credit, Ranger fans on social media for pointing this out, because you hear him say it and you hear him say it and you hear him say it. But for me, this one didn't resonate as much as like, it's a power play goal from Sam Rosen, right? But Joe always says this, and I love it. And anytime he's breaking down a goal by the Rangers, especially if it's one of those like blue collar goals. There weren't many of those this past year, but just roll with it for the time being here. A blue collar goal where they're basically outworking their opponents and they're moving the puck, get some good passing in there, and they eventually finish. One of those goals where maybe it's a long offensive zone possession. He would always break down the goal, and right in the middle there, he would say, "And then the Rangers go to work." I'm gonna miss him saying that. It's one of those things you kind of hear it subconsciously more than you really kind of pay attention to it, but he loves saying that. And I'm not even sure if he knew how much he was saying it, but it was fun, and it was a neat little catchphrase for him. And I've always said, my favorite goals watching hockey when it's my team scoring is the one where my team just flat out outworks the other team. And I love a good, tic-tac-toe goal with all this awesome passing. I love somebody, pulling off a great move on a breakaway as much as the next person. But those blue-collar goals are the fun ones. And I get the feeling, Joe, those are probably his favorite goals, too. And he had a catchphrase to go right along with it. But more than like the calls, I'll just miss the moments. Sam and Joe made it fun. I think that one of the best things that sports announcers can do, whether it's, play-by-play, color, whether they're in the studio, whether it's a highlight show, whatever it might be, the best thing that anybody that works in sports media can do is kind of give off this vibe where anybody watching, anybody listening, whatever it might be, gets that feeling that you're just kind of hanging out with them. You're hanging out watching the Ranger game with them. And that's how I always felt with Sam and Joe. For Sam, longer than Joe. For Sam, obviously, it was 40 years. For Joe, it was 19 years. But didn't you feel that way? Like when they were calling a game and you're watching and obviously, emotions run high and we're all big Ranger fans, regular season playoffs, whatever it might be. But it always just felt like we were right there, right along with them. We were right along for the ride with them. And, just enjoying Ranger hockey with our friends, even though in my case, I've never met either one of them in person. I would love to have either one of them on this podcast. I mean, believe me about that. And some of you guys have met them every now and then. We heard a couple of stories from your encounters with Sam Rosen, and that's obviously awesome. But that was the thing, man. They were our friends as much as they were the Ranger announcers. So that's what I'm going to miss more than anything. I think for sure we'll get some of that with Kenny Albert and whoever might replace Joe as the color analyst. But be that as it may, nothing's ever going to feel quite the same, I don't think, as Sam and Joe. And both just very down-to-earth guys. Everybody who met them says they're awesome. And, definitely going to miss both of them. We knew that we were losing Sam. To lose Joe, too, though, that's pretty rough for sure. But I'll say this, too. I said the same thing about Sam Rosen when we knew he was going to be retiring, that, I hope that Sam is still around at least every once in a while where, he's in the booth every so often. He comes back as a guest, or maybe he's in the MSG studio, or maybe it's just like a Zoom kind of thing where he just calls in and they ask Sam, what do you think about the Rangers tonight? I hope it's the same thing for Joe. I know that he mentioned that he wants to enjoy retirement and he wants to spend more time with family, and that's great and more power to him. But if he ever wants to, poke his head into the MSG studio every once in a while, I don't think any of us are going to say no. So again, just going to miss both of them for sure. we'll see. Hopefully they're still in the picture, but figure we can call it there for today. There was one more thing that I want to mention real quick here at the end of the show. We've got the World Championships coming up this Friday. That's when they begin, and a couple of Rangers going to participate. The 3 players that are confirmed to compete in this tournament so far: Mika Zibanejad going to be playing for Sweden, Will Cooley going to be playing for Canada, and Brett Berard going to be playing for the United States. So looking forward to watching that. I still think I would watch the Stanley Cup playoffs over any of that. I mean, the World Championships are cool. I do enjoy them, and it'll be fun to watch a couple of Rangers in action. But the Stanley Cup playoffs are the Stanley Cup playoffs. They have no equal in hockey or any other sport. But we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, that is @JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.